The dangers of Marketplace struck again, and a couple of months ago, while browsing, I impulse bought this AP Racing Big Brake Kit for my Astra VXR. This kit uses 345mm Venta discs from a Vectra VXR, which should be super cheap to replace. However, the Big Brake Kit itself is anything but cheap. Brand new from the original seller, Rayland Motorsports, this would have cost £1,800, but I got it for a steal at £600 on Marketplace. As you can see, the paint's a bit of an out there colour, and it's not in great condition, so I'm going to give these a freshen up and redo them in a new colour. So first, the pins that the pads slide along have to be removed so that we can get the pads out. The pins are gently hammered out with a punch and then pulled the rest of the way with pliers. Then we can just lift the pads away. With the pads out the way, it was time to remove the caliper carriers, which are held in by some massive hex bolts, so that we can strip the paint from just the calipers on their own. For my first unsuccessful attempt, I dolloped on loads of paint stripper, not worrying about the seals because I was going to replace them anyway, left it to sit for about an hour, and here's what I came back to. You can see the paint had gone quite furry, and it did make it easier to remove with a wire brush, but this was just marring the soft aluminium of the caliper, so I gave up on this as a bad job. My next attempt at removing the old paint made use of this paint stripping disc on an angle grinder, which did a lot better job. It was super easy to remove the paint this time, and it didn't ruin the surface finish of the metal underneath, but still there was no way I was getting in all of the crevices on these calipers. Even a Dremel wouldn't get in all the nooks and crannies, and was honestly just making a mess. So here's where I cheated. Yeah, I paid someone to powder coat them for me, in a DIY video. But let me explain. Any place that does shot blasting, which was going to be the only way to get these completely clean of the old paint, also does powder coating. So if you're dropping it off for shot blasting, you might as well get it coated. I left the pistons and the seals and all the hardware in, and asked the shot blasting company to mask this area off that I've highlighted red after shot blasting so that no powder coat gets on the seals and stuff, because the inside of the caliper doesn't have to look great. But they chose to ignore that and do what they wanted, so in hindsight I should have just masked it myself and not left it up to them. But anyways, here I'm cracking loose one of the bleed screws so that we can pop the pistons out. Usually you'd use a compressor, but I don't have one, so I actually jerry-rigged a bike pump. I removed the plastic cap from the end of the pump to expose the rubber seal, pushed that over one of the bleed nipples, wedged the whole thing with my foot, placed a reaction block inside, which I used the caliper carrier because it happened to be the right size, and this just stops the pistons from all popping out, because if one pops out, then you won't be able to get the rest out because there'll be no air pressure. And then I started pumping. And as you can see, although my camera defocused and I had to straighten the block back up, the pistons slowly popped out. Trust me, I'm just as surprised as you are that this even worked, and I could proceed to wiggle them the rest of the way out by hand, being careful not to scratch anything. The little glass beads from shot blasting get absolutely everywhere, so you're not going to be able to do this without taking the caliper apart, thoroughly cleaning everything, and probably replacing the pistons, because some of mine got scratched by the glass beads on the way out. Honestly, this job is not for the faint of heart, and I would seriously just recommend sending them off to AP for a rebuild. Nothing was hard, but it was all fiddly, and you have to be really careful not to scratch the body of the caliper itself on the inside. Here I'm removing the seals that actually stop the brake fluid from coming out. This is where you want to be the most careful, because a scratch behind this O-ring will cause your brake calipers to be big expensive garbage. With that though, the calipers are almost fully stripped down, and we can get to the thorough cleaning that needs to happen before we can fit the new seals and pistons. Speaking of the new seals, they need to be soaked in brake fluid for 30 minutes before we can actually fit them to the calipers. Now I'm removing the bleed screws. followed by the banjos and stacks of washers that I used to block up the holes for the banjo bolts for the duration of the powder coating process, and using all of the holes for hydraulic fluid to blast out the inside of the caliper with brake cleaner. At this point, between brake clean, compressed air cans and microfibers, I spent about 45 minutes per caliper cleaning out all of the shot that got inside during the shot blasting process. This was by far the most painstaking part of refreshing these calipers, and it's the bit that you absolutely have to do right, because if any glass beads are left inside the calipers, they could destroy your ABS pump, the seals on your calipers, your master cylinder, and just give you a really bad day when you have no brakes. While I was at it, I cleaned up the mating surfaces for the banjos with some steel wool, once again soaking everything in brake cleaner to try and wash away any particulates before we reassemble the calipers. After spending an excessive amount of time cleaning, which was incredibly necessary and not actually excessive at all, it's time to fit the new seals. I plopped them down on a clean microfiber, arranged in the positions that they would go in the caliper, since on each side of each caliper there is a small seal and a big seal, and a corresponding small piston and big piston. The hydraulic seals go in first, they just pop into the channel on the inside of the caliper, exactly how we removed them. You just have to make sure they're flat all around and not twisted or kinked at all. And then I can start putting the dust boots onto the pistons. So now, I'll line these up so the big ones are on the right again, small ones on the left. It is a case of just pushing them in, basically. So I'll grab a small one first. I'm going to wet these, just so they're not getting together dry. Probably don't have to, the instructions don't say to, but they do say to wet the seals. So it can't hurt to also have the pistons wet. Press them in like that. And that's it, one done. A few more to go. There we go, one's all the way in. Now I can fit the shiny new bleed nipples, which come in the rebuild kit. And finally, the wear plates have to be replaced. These are supposed to be shiny, smooth metal for the pad to slide along, but again, the powder coating place didn't listen, so they got powder coated over and didn't get masked off. These had to be ordered separately from the caliper rebuild kit, which consists of just the seals and the bleed screws. And these wear plates are £4 each, and there are 8 of them across 2 calipers, 4 per caliper. Add to that £14 per piston for 8 pistons, and £45 per seal kit, of which there are 2 seal kits for 2 calipers. The cost of rebuilding your calipers yourself really starts to add up. A couple of the screws that hold in the wear plates actually rounded off, so I did order some more from Screwfix. They are M6 by 12mm button screws, and for £4 for 50 of them, it was worth replacing them all just to do it right. And there you have it. The AP Racing CP6600 calipers for my big brake kit for the Astra VXR track car are fully rebuilt and refurbished. In the next video I'll be fitting them to the car along with some new rear discs and pads, so remember to subscribe and stay tuned to see that. But for now, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.